Ladies and gentlemen, I've seen the feedback regarding my ratings from a certain content creator, and honestly, I welcome it. Constructive criticism is valuable as it helps refine my approach. To clarify, my original ratings were based on a combination of objectivity and perceived appeal. Objectivity carried more weight, but appeal was assessed in a subjective manner, primarily to gauge how individuals are perceived by the opposite sex on average. This aspect comes with inherent challenges. It's difficult to quantify, varies based on the type of content a person produces, and naturally includes a degree of subjectivity. Over time, this caused some confusion among viewers, leading to inflated ratings for individuals who receive significant amount of female attention, such as Theo James, Michelle Morone, and even cases like Ryan Gosling. In the world of face rating, disagreements are inevitable, even when attempting to be as objective as possible. Introducing appeal into the equation makes things even trickier. Someone might be rated as a 9 in one demographic, but only a 6 in another. That's completely understandable, as long as the criteria are clearly defined. In hindsight, I could have done a better job distinguishing between these factors. With that said, I've been working on a refined rating and scale system, which I plan to present within the next 2 weeks. But today we're here to respond to FaceIQ by analyzing his rating system. Right away I noticed inconsistencies. His system appears to have a bias towards specific facial types and individuals, the biggest one being Elias. Additionally, he seems to be placing an excessive amount of emphasis on angularity in his formula and conflates certain metrics, like PSL, with objective attractiveness. In his system, Elias is higher than Brad Pitt or Alain Delon, something that, frankly, shouldn't even be a topic of debate. FaceIQ's scale appears to be structured more as a PSL model suitability scale, rather than a true measure of attractiveness to the opposite sex. If he clarified this intent, there would be no issue. But he presents his system as the most objective measure of attractiveness, which simply isn't accurate. He overlooks scientific flaws that are widely regarded as unfavorable for attractiveness, instead favoring striking or unique features that might be desirable in a modeling context. But to top it all, and this is by far worse, his ratings seem to reflect personal biases. Let's examine his Elias rating as a key example of these issues. One major red flag is the way measurements are handled. For instance, Elias was given an 87.8% frontal harmony score, which is simply impossible if you follow the harmony formulas. Starting with the ideal eye aspect ratio, which is in between 2.8 to 3.6, Elias's eye aspect ratio is 4, but FaceIQ ignored this and deemed it as perfect.
The eye relative to the height. And Elias in this photo has a 4-to-1 ratio, which is absolutely insane. Someone like Henry Cavill only has 2.8-to-1. Someone like Matt Bomer has like 3-to-1. But he has a 4-to-1, and Sean O'Pry has a 3.6-to-1. So this is like the highest I've ever seen, and it's absolutely insane. So this is perfect.
In his analysis of Brad Pitt, you can see that he acknowledges the 2.8 to 3.6 range for this measurement.
Which, again, that's in the ideal range of 2.8 to 3.6.
Similarly, the same happened with the Canthal tilt measurement. An overly positive Canthal tilt is a feminizing trait, and it can make the person look uncanny. Science suggests an ideal tilt where the medial canthus is 5 to 8 degrees below the lateral canthus. FaceIQ once again overlooked the fact that Elias exceeded this range, failing to deduct points appropriately.
And the absolute perfect in men is about 6 degrees, but it's one of those things that's like more of a good feature. So having 9 degrees is still perfect and it looks great. Though it's slightly more feminine, it's not a flaw.
These two measurements alone explain the reason why a vast majority of people consider Elias uncanny looking. Why does this matter? Because in physical attractiveness studies, averageness describes the physical beauty that results from averaging the facial features of people of the same gender and approximately the same age. Because facial averageness is more critical for attractiveness than extreme or uncommon features. Evolutionary biology supports this concept through koinophilia, the preference for mates with largely average traits, as extreme deviations can indicate potential genetic disadvantages. If the goal is to measure how attractive someone is, all of these factors must be considered. Otherwise, the system is merely identifying the best candidates for modeling rather than attractiveness in a general broad sense. Now let's take a look at more ratios where FaceIQ decide to either ignore the flaw or straight up lying about the measurements. When analyzing Elias's facial thirds, FaceIQ estimated his hairline placement rather than using a clear reference image such as this one. In this clear picture with the hairline visible, Elias has a 31.99 upper third, a 30.59 middle third, and a 37.40 lower third. Although they are favorable thirds, the deviation calls for a Tier 2 score, Not a tier 1 score as FaceIQ claims. This ties into some of the other flaws Elias has, such as a high gonial angle and a downgrown jaw. Once again, FaceIQ showing a bias in here. He also miscalculated Elias's mouth-to-nose width ratio at 1.53 in this picture, and you can even see in the video that he has measuring it wrong. The correct ratio is 1.58, and the range given by FaceIQ is
times wider than the nose width, and the ideal range is 1.45 to 1.53.
For this next measurement, FaceIQ once again disregards the deduction and considers it perfectly acceptable, but it falls under the ideal range.
His eyes are about 0.88 eye lengths apart, which is somewhat closer than you typically see, but this is due to a good reason. So Elias has very high PFL, which is just the eye fissure length. So when you have higher eye fissure length, no matter what, you're basically going to have closer set eyes, like according to this test. So like someone like Matt Bomer or Jordan Barrett or other people with high PFL, which is a positive trait, have these closer set eyes. So this is not really a flaw at all. Now, once you get below like 0.85, that's when it's normally because they actually have close set eyes. But Elias does not have close set eyes at all, like as we saw with his eye separation ratio. So this is not a flaw. And you can visibly see it looks fine because it's not 0.88 apart for a bad reason. It's a good reason.
Notably, you will notice a recurring pattern in this rating. FaceIQ is consistently trying to justify Elias's flaws, which again points at bias. Another wrong reported measurement is found in the jaw frontal angle. You can see in the video how he gets a 77.9 but rounds it up to 80 degrees. Similarly, he also measured Elias's jaw width wrong at 85% when in reality it is lower than that. Likely he is doing it on purpose to deduct less points and make Elias score as high as he can. Not everything is inaccurate. He did correctly identify the lower lip to upper lip ratio. However, as I said previously, he consistently downplays Elias's flaws.
One flaw he does have, which is very minor, is that his lower lip to upper lip ratio is bad at 1.1 to 1, where in reality it should be 1.7 to 2. So his lower lip should be taller and his upper lip should be a bit shorter. But since he still has full lips, it's a very minor flaw.
Ultimately, he assigns Elias an 87.8% frontal harmony score, which is absurd given the number of flaws present. A key detail is that he compares Elias's harmony score to Brad Pitt's.
This is like equivalent to, I think, Brad Pitt's front score. So this is really high. And this is what you would expect to see in a top model. I mean, this is higher than Shauna Pry, higher than, really most people in the front profile.
Yet in his latest analyses, he rates Pitt around 82% for frontal harmony. The bias against Brad Pitt is also evident in the total face height to width measurement. In the original Elias video, FaceIQ stated that Pitt had a 1.35 ratio in this category.
1.33 to 1.35 is perfect. So someone like Brad Pitt has 1.35, Elias is 1.33.
However, in his most recent analysis, he claims Pitt's ratio is 1.29, measured from a low-quality image where Pitt's hairline isn't fully visible. Using higher-quality images where the full hairline is clear, I consistently get a ratio between 1.34 and 1.35, which is ideal. Other channels, such as Cove Studio, also place Pitt's ratio around 1.35. While this could be an honest mistake, at this point, it appears more like an attempt to push Pitt's score closer to the low 8 range, likely the range FaceIQ had in mind for him from the start. Moving on to Elias's side profile, we have yet another questionable measurement from FaceIQ. Instead of using a higher quality image, he chooses a poor one, and you'll see why that is. He does acknowledge that Elias doesn't have an ideal gonial angle, but in this particular image, he measures it at 124 degrees. In a proper side profile picture, the measurement would typically be around 128. This seems intentional, allowing him to deduct less points in order to keep Elias's score as high as he can. I think we've seen plenty at this point. Now let's break down how he arrived at the final score. And this is where it gets even more absurd. So let's hear what he has to say.
His overall score would be about an 8.8 out of 10, which on paper, this would be higher than Chico in my opinion, who I have at about an 8.5. So yeah, higher than Sean O'Prah as well. So absolutely one of the best looking men, no doubt about it.
What kind of formula are you using where you assign these 4 values and somehow arrive at an 8.8 score? This suggests you're giving an excessive amount of weight to the angularity category. But honestly, it seems like you just pulled that number out of thin air, because mathematically, it doesn't add up. The real issue is that you claim your system is entirely objective, yet you contradict yourself. Just a month ago, you essentially admitted in a comment that there is subjectivity involved in assessing facial angularity and the extent of flaws in features. This is your own words. This inconsistency is reflected in your ratings, as you deducted far more points than necessary for Brad Pitt's nose shape in his feature score, for example. You also deducted way too many points for Vasilei's miscellaneous features. Ultimately, the main problem is that you present your system as purely objective, yet you've acknowledged that subjectivity plays a role. This means that in the end, it isn't truly objective at all. Returning to Elias, if you applied the original harmony formula, his harmony score would realistically fall between 73% and 75%, depending on the image used. Overall, Elias isn't likely to score that high, certainly not above an 8. In terms of dimorphism, several factors prevent him from reaching that level. His entire jaw area alone with a short rhombus height, a high feminized gonial angle, a downgrown jaw, and a lack of jaw width. In addition, he also has a feminized mouth-to-nose width ratio and a frail, thin neck. Also, although Elias has a great brow ridge projection, it lacks a bit of brow ridge bossing. An example of Tier 1 brow ridge bossing would be Jensen Ackles. In the features category, he has flared ears, no egiosal, a rounded jawline, an overly pale complexion, and a relatively high hairline. And the icing on the cake, he also has yellow teeth. Given these aspects, his feature score would also be below an 8. For angularity, a 9 might seem reasonable at first glance, assuming you ignore his side profile. However, his rounded jawline and lack of rhombus sharpness prevent him from truly reaching a 9 in this category. Many would argue that Elias doesn't even visually appear to be a 7 due to his extremely low appeal, let alone an 8. However, to remain objective and unbiased, he does possess enough harmony and traits to be classified somewhere in the 7 range. If your system places excessive emphasis on angularity, uniqueness, and striking features, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it's more suited for evaluating someone's potential in the modeling industry rather than measuring how attractive they are to the average person. Quite frankly, when you rate Elias an 8.8 while giving Brad Pitt a flat 8, it raises serious questions because the numbers simply don't add up. If the majority of people disagree with your ratings, then perhaps the problem isn't with them, it's with your system. Another issue that needs to be addressed is the way you're quantifying dimorphism, which is clearly flawed, evidently by you claiming that Vicilei Stepanov has 10 dimorphism, or that Brad Pitt has 7.8 while Elias Deput has 8 dimorphism. Once again, using your methods to assess dimorphism leads to conclusions that don't align with reality. It seems like you don't fully understand the definition of facial dimorphism. You assess dimorphism by looking at harmony measurements that lean toward the masculine or feminine spectrum. While you can use this method to calculate a ratio-based assessment as part of an equation, it should never be the sole factor in determining someone's actual dimorphism. For example, when determining if someone has a wide neck, the ratios can lead to a misleading interpretation. If someone's jaw is narrower, the neck ratio will be wider, while not being necessarily a wider neck in absolute terms. Take a look at Elias and Brad Pitt necks, for example. If you just look at the ratio, you would conclude that Elias has a wider neck, but in reality, Brad Pitt's neck is wider. But because his jaw is so wide, it makes the ratio lower. Using your own method for assessing facial dimorphism, by looking at whether the ratios lean more masculine or feminine, we can still conclude that you're either making mistakes or misrepresenting the data. It would be impossible for Vicilei to score a 10 in dimorphism. Considering that he has a few ratios that trend feminine rather than masculine, they are the jaw width, the gonial angle, the mouth-to-nose width, eye aspect ratio, and nasofrontal angle. On top of that, he has masculinizing ratios that are Tier 2, such as the chin to philtrum and eye separation. You cannot attribute maximum points for these ratios, therefore he could never score a 10 or 100%. This has also been pointed out by others in the comments section. Vicilei certainly has a dimorphic face above an 8, but never a 10. It also seems like you're not deducting points correctly for the features score. A 7.3 is quite low for someone like Vicilei Stepanov. You're taking off an excessive amount of points. A score around 8.5 for features would have been much more reasonable. But it appears you tried to fit Vicilei into your projected score, so you were overly harsh in the features section. This likely stems from the flaws in your dimorphism formula. As for angularity though, a 9.5 for Vicilei is fair, so no critique there. The same case happens for Hexam in his latest video. Again, it simply isn't possible for Hexam to be a 10 in dimorphism, provided that his total face height to width ratio and his gonial angle stray to the feminine side. The same level of inconsistency appears when we revisit the Brad Pitt versus Elias comparison. It's ironic, really. because we don't even need to run any measurements to visually see and understand that Brad Pitt is simply more masculine overall, especially in his jaw area. However, I decided to dig deeper and analyze it using your own method. What I found is that in most of the primary measurements that are crucial for dimorphism, Brad Pitt leans more toward the masculine spectrum than Elias. His jaw is wider, his gonial angle is more masculine, while Elias has a high gonial angle combined with a downgrown jaw, both feminizing traits. Brad Pitt's mouth-to-nose ratio is also more masculine, and his eye separation is closer to the masculine spectrum, unlike Elias's. In terms of Cantal tilt, Brad stays within the ideal range, while Elias surpasses it, exceeding the upper limits, a feminizing trait that also causes Elias to look slightly uncanny. Elias strays towards the masculine spectrum in the FWHR ratio, lower set eyebrows, and a higher eye aspect ratio, although with this last one it negatively impacts his harmony. So once again, how did you arrive at the conclusion that Elias is an 8 out of 10 in dimorphism, while Brad Pitt is a 7.8? Looking at the dimorphism scale from the literature, it's clear that Brad Pitt is much closer to the higher end of the dimorphism spectrum than Elias. Yes, Elias may have a slightly more dimorphic eye area, especially because Brad Pitt has negatively tilted eyebrows, but overall, the jaw is the biggest contributor to dimorphism. This is certainly supported by scientific studies, and this is how in general most people perceive dimorphism. The next and final major point to address is the whole issue with harmony data sets. First off, I can't speak for Wheat Waffles or Nero Angelo, but I'm certainly not using a harmony data set that includes faces like Wheat Waffles, Andrew Tate, or Ryan Gosling. And neither is the original creator of the harmony formula, Creating Attractive. As you can see, Creating Attractive denies that by himself. And even if we didn't have this statement, we could go back to his unlisted videos and see what Creating Attractive himself has to say about this topic.
Okay, in this video we're going to be analyzing Andrew Tate, and I think this will be a really interesting case analysis, as well as the fact that he's very popular right now, which is a good idea for a video. He also has a fairly average face, so we'll see. Okay, in this video we're going to be analyzing and rating the YouTuber Wheat Waffles. We'll try to decompartmentalize his facial features and see exactly what makes him more average, because obviously he isn't at the high end of the spectrum of facial attractiveness. In this video we're going to be analyzing Ryan Gosling, and this is actually quite exciting for me because I really do enjoy analyzing different looking faces, and he has quite different features from the normal that we've seen in the past videos. Alright, this should be a really interesting one because my personal opinion is I think he's going to score the highest among all 30 men, and all the men I'm analyzing are already inherently attractive because I picked them to study what would make an attractive measurement.
As you can see, Creating Attractive specifically selected 30 highly attractive men to study the ideal measurements in conjunction with looking at the literature. He considers Wheat Waffles, Andrew Tate, and Ryan Gosling to have average-looking faces. So there's absolutely no indication that these three were included in the original dataset. So once again, I'm not sure where FaceIQ got this information from, but it's definitely inaccurate. Lastly, you criticize the accuracy of my scale, but your scale fails to align with reality for the most part. I can totally understand why after seeing this comment from you. What's not accurate to reality is placing Elias Depute above Brad Pitt, Alain Delon, or Francisco Lukowski. Honestly, it would be extremely difficult to find a single woman who would agree with that assessment. That's just a fact. What's also not accurate to reality is rating Jordan Barrett a 9 when his proportions make him look extremely uncanny. His facial proportions are overly squished, his FWHR is too high, his face shape is very compact, his mid-face ratio is very compact and squished, and his facial thirds are off. His mouth-to-nose ratio is too high, his canthal tilt is too positive, and his rhombus is on the shorter side. In terms of dimorphism, as said previously, his mouth-to-nose ratio is too high, and that is a feminizing trait. His overall skull is small, his rhombus could be taller, his nose is short, and his gonial angle, although still ideal, it is already trending on the feminine side. Jordan Barrett simply cannot be a 9 out of 10 objectively with all this flaws. There are also other ratings that don't make sense, like those for Carrington, Archie Cranch, or Vinny Hacker, but I think enough has been said at this point. No system for measuring facial attractiveness will ever be perfect, and I think it's important for you to show more humility in your claims, and acknowledge the mistakes and biases that are present in your system as well. In the end, you tend to overlook scientifically objective flaws in order to fit certain individuals into the scores you believe are appropriate. That, my friend, is not objective.